Okay, so the next step in the maintenance procedure is to change the transmission fluid as well as the transmission filter. Now, you will sometimes hear those being referred to as the hydraulic fluid and the hydraulic filter. Same thing. Just keep in mind that the fluid in the transmission is essentially the hydraulic fluid, which is obviously operating all of your hydraulic implements, including your loader, your power steering, anything that has hydraulic on the tractor is being run with that same fluid. So that's what we're going to take a look at next. Let's go ahead, let's get started. Okay, the first step in the process is to put a drain pan under the drain plug. You can see that I'm pointing to the drain plug right there. You're going to need a 27mm socket to loosen up the drain plug. Keep in mind that the fluid capacity in this case is 11.9 quarts. So you want to make sure that you have a big enough drain pan and understand that it is going to flow out quickly. As you just saw there, remember this is hydraulic fluid, so it's very, very thin. It's almost like water in terms of the flow rate that you're going to see. If you have a drain pan that is a trough style, in other words, the oil runs down a trough and then it goes to an opening, be mindful that this oil is going to flow so quickly that it will probably overwhelm the opening and you're going to end up with a mess. Notice that the fluid is actually splashing everywhere. The main reason for that is because I forgot to remove the dipstick right away. So that's obviously causing a little bit of a vacuum, and that's why the fluid does not come out in a steady stream. Additionally, it's not helping that I have the tractor elevated and essentially the drain pan is so far away. But I find it easier to have the tractor elevated just to be able to access everything. Now watch what happens once I remove the dipstick. Look at how fast that fluid is actually flowing out of the transmission. That's why I said you want to make sure that you have a suitable drain pan ready that has the right capacity and preferably something that's open like the one that I'm using here. And with the magic of video editing, you do not have to watch the tractor drain in real time. Also, now is a great time to give this video a big thumbs up. And it's also a great time to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more videos just like this one. Okay, at this point, I'm going to let the transmission continue to drip while I remove the transmission filter. However, it is perfectly fine if you want to reinstall the drain plug before you remove the filter. That's actually what most people do, but since my drain pan is large enough, I'm just going to let it continue to drip out of there until I'm done installing the new filter. Okay, so next I'm going to use a pair of oil filter pliers to remove the transmission filter. Now, one thing I do not like about this set of pliers, and really any set of oil filter pliers, is sometimes it is tough to grip. In this case, it was slipping and then you dent the filter, which I'm not too concerned about that because obviously I'm removing it anyway, and the amount of grime on this filter does not help matters. So I'm just going to go ahead and spin off the old filter. Be prepared because you are going to get a surge of oil that drips out of there. And again, it flows so quickly. Just be ready for it. That's why I have the drain pan moved over so it's right underneath that. And you can see I'm just allowing a moment for it to drain. And then once I end up unscrewing it the whole way, you're going to see that I'm going to get yet another burst of oil that's going to come out of it. You could try to hold this upright to try to minimize that, but I just figured it doesn't really make a difference. The drain pan is there for a reason. So I went ahead and left the majority of the oil come out of it. I actually set the filter in a half-size aluminum steam pan just so I can allow it to drain the rest of the way. Okay, now it's time to install the new filter. You want to make sure that you apply a thin film of fresh transmission oil on the rubber gasket. I also marked the filter and I marked on it the hours as well as fluid and filter change. That way I know when I look at it later what maintenance was performed. When you are installing the new filter, it's important to spin it on until it makes contact with the transmission. Then you're supposed to tighten it an additional 1/2 turn. It's important that you don't over tighten it because remember, in time it will become tighter and that makes it even harder to remove. Admittedly, my gloves still had a little bit of oil on them, so I struggled initially to get this tightened the additional half turn, but then I finally was able to get a grip on it and tighten it the rest of the way. The next step is to reinstall the drain plug, and you do want to make sure that you still have the washer on the drain plug. I forgot to mention that earlier whenever I removed it. Just make sure the washer is intact. I always like to thread it in by hand until it makes contact, and then I'm going to use the 27mm socket to just snug it up the rest of the way. Okay, the next step is to clean the transmission strainer. So this can be found on the operator's left side of the tractor behind the rear wheel. That's the view that you're seeing right now. It's important to understand that if you change the fluid and you don't clean this strainer, you've essentially wasted your money because you could be circulating particles through that brand new fluid, and the whole point of this is to remove dirt from the system. Okay, we're going to go ahead and remove the transmission strainer. For this, you're going to need a 12mm socket. You are simply removing a bolt that holds a bracket in place, and that bracket is what holds the strainer in place. So the strainer itself does not bolt into the machine. It actually fits in there tightly with an O-ring, and then the bracket is bolted to the machine, and the bracket holds the strainer in place. Okay, so I'm going to use the 12mm socket to basically break the bolt free. Once I get it loosened up, then I'm going to remove it by hand the rest of the way. I should also mention that you definitely want to have your drain pan here. I went ahead and emptied all the fluid out of my drain pan. That way, if the strainer would drop in there, it's not dropping into nearly 3 gallons of fluid, but you are going to get some fluid out of the transmission when you remove the strainer. In order to remove the strainer, I used a pair of channel lock pliers. I'm just grabbing a hold of it and I'm going to wiggle it slightly so that I can break it free. Remember, it's not screwed in there, it's simply pressed in there, and the O-ring is creating a very tight seal. Once I break it free, I can go ahead and pull it out by hand. This is where you're going to see a little bit more oil run out of the transmission. Just be careful you don't damage it whenever you're removing it from the transmission. Okay, let's take a look at the strainer up close. You can see that there are fine particles on there. It is hard to see some of them because of the oil and then the lighting is making it shine, but we're going to go ahead and clean the strainer. In order to clean the strainer, I'm actually going to use some carburetor cleaner. You want to be mindful of the O-ring. Do not spray any solvents on the O-ring because that could cause premature failure of the O-ring. So I'm going to spray it with carburetor cleaner, and then I'm going to use the air compressor to dry everything off. You want to make sure whenever you're using the air compressor that you are blowing things away from the screen. You're not blowing dirt into the screen. I didn't get any footage of actually using the compressor on this strainer, but as you can see, it looks very clean now, and it's ready to be reinstalled. When reinstalling the transmission strainer, you want to make sure that the hole is facing you when you're pushing it back into the transmission. When you push it back into the transmission, you will notice that it goes in almost the whole way, and then you can give it another push, and sometimes you'll hear a clicking noise, but you'll definitely be able to tell whenever you've pushed it in entirely because there is a little bit of resistance there. Next, we're going to go ahead and reinstall the keeper bracket along with the bolt. You may have to turn the transmission strainer slightly if the bracket does not line up, but in this case it lined up perfectly, so I am simply retightening the 12mm bolt by hand, and then I'm going to snug it up with my 12mm socket. Okay, we are almost done with this process. If you haven't already, please give this video a big thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel, that way you don't miss out on any of my Kubota maintenance videos. Before we add the fluid, it's important to talk about the fluid type. This is one of those things that people oftentimes try to cheapen out on. You want to make sure that you are using Kubota Super UDT2 Universal Trans Hydraulic Fluid. Do not go to your local farm supply store and buy the cheapest hydraulic fluid that you can find. The cheap hydraulic fluid will not have the same specifications as the Kubota branded fluid. There is a reason why it is cheaper. It is missing some of the additives that are necessary for this machine to perform correctly. Okay, now it's time to refill the transmission with oil. For this, you're going to need a long funnel, and you're going to insert the funnel into the fill port, which is the same port that the dipstick goes into. The goal here is to fill the transmission with oil until it reaches the top of the cross hatches on the dipstick. Once the oil reaches the required level, we're going to start the engine for a couple minutes, and then we're going to recheck the oil level. I'm going to save you some time and tell you that the unit took just a couple ounces shy of 3 gallons. That amount actually brought it up to the top of the cross hatches on the dipstick. Remember, this is dependent upon the amount of oil that is actually drained out of the system. After running the engine for approximately 2 minutes, I rechecked the level on the dipstick, and surprisingly, there was no oil registered on the dipstick at all. This is primarily due to the new oil filter, which absorbs a considerable amount of fluid. I topped off the transmission fluid with another half quart of oil, and that brought the oil up to the top of the cross hatches on the dipstick. And that is how you change the transmission oil and filter on a Kubota BX80 series. If you haven't already, please give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.